Hello, everyone. It's Friday, July 10th, 2020. I am so glad we're all here today because let me tell you, it is raining in New York City and a brother was taking a nap. So I'm sorry for being, we're only 2 minutes late. Hello, everyone. Welcome. How are you ladies doing?
Doing well, doing well.
Yeah, doing well.
Ebanks, you want to go ahead and introduce our guest? We've had her on before, but you can go ahead.
Yes. Kim Edwards is returning with us. She is a clinician with the MECCA Group and has been a complete asset to our group, to our team. She is a Washington-based clinician. She has so much experience and education foundation, a strong educational foundation. She has a Bachelor's of Science as well, a Master's of Education in Speech and Language Pathology from the University of Virginia, as well as a graduate certificate in Applied Behavior Analysis from George Mason University. She conducts workshops, she does trainings, she does a wealth of information and professional development within the public school sector in DC. And she also has had 10 years of clinical experience in home health as well as skilled nursing facilities. So again, we thank and welcome Kim Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me back.
Mute.
Oh, I don't know if I can hear you, Brandon.
Sorry, I was on mute. You definitely can't hear me. Welcome back, Brandon. So we're talking about, Children's Day, and we know that children are going back to school in a matter of weeks all across the country. We just don't know if there would be some homeschooling still. Will they go to a physical space? What do you think about the readiness for children to be back in school right now, seeing as we're still in a pandemic?
Right. I mean, I think that you've kind of hit the nail on the head as far as it's still somewhat up in the air, right? There are several conversations surrounding this topic that are both macro and micro when it comes to readiness socially, readiness emotionally, academically, of course. We're going to have those academic gaps where staff and teachers need to focus really on where do we pinpoint, where do we prioritize, and really bringing everyone together to the table to have these discussions, right? Because right now, parents and guardians have been the teachers, so to speak, during this time.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of considerations that we have to look at for the new year that's coming. I can't believe we're already talking about the new year. The new school year, because I feel like it just, I guess the timing of everything, it just kind of went so fast. So how do you ascertain, how do you assess whether a child is ready? Let's look at the social and emotional development of a child. How do you assess what is healthy?
Sure. I think you asked a great question, because I think in assessing whether something is typical or atypical or what we expect to see, we've got to really have a similar definition, right, for what's healthy. What do we want to see that child doing? And really, in the realm of social and emotional, we want to see them reacting in a way that's positive, really for their social climate. Sometimes I call it like a social world, like you in the social world that you exist in, that space you take up. Are you able to express yourself emotionally well? And also, can you understand how other people are expressing themselves emotionally? It's somewhat of a myriad of skills that you're trying to really reach a level of competency in order to have success, right? Because social and emotional skills are just as important as the academic skills when you talk about school success and just being in healthy relationships. And the way that you would see that would be, right, some of the social and like self-control. You would see that in attention, or you would hear teachers maybe say a student's focus or not focus. And I think about verbalizing their emotions is really what you want to be able to see in order to be able to assess whether their development is healthy and flourishing, really.
I think, a lot of people don't maybe think how much of an impact this pandemic these over the last few months have been on children and just everybody, period. How should we, parents, clinicians, how should we all assess, the impact, the trauma, if you will, of a child, and kind of check on their readiness to return back to a space that's really uncertain. We really don't know how this will work out. And so you may have an anxious child. How can we assess the readiness for children to return back to school?
Right. I think that example, if I can use that, anxiety, although it's difficult to really measure and define, we look at those behaviors that might manifest as a result of that anxiety or that change. Because ultimately, that's what behavior is, right? It's a change in someone's actions based on their environment. And the environment that we see now may look different for each child because they might be at home with parents, grandparents. They might be in a foster care system. It might change. I definitely have had students where, depending on the week, they're at a different home. And so their behavior is going to shift based on that because they're either getting reinforced positively or reinforced in a way that's kind of pulling them away or a negative reinforcement, so to speak, a lack there of maybe attention. And so a lot of times that's what you'll see is a shift in attention. And that's kind of like one of those signs that, okay, maybe our social emotional kind of barrier, or maybe our realm for understanding if this is typical should be lit up. Might be a red flag if we're seeing more mood shifts or habits that aren't consistent with what we saw before. That child that might be super social and may have had lots of friends is now more withdrawn or pulled back or a little bit more irritable than they might have been before. Because like you said, it is somewhat of a trauma. You have your different factors that people really define as what's traumatic or what's impactful. But I would say this COVID pandemic is just like the ACEs that you have in mental health. You have your adverse childhood environments because they are being in a new environment. They're being at home. They're being excluded or secluded from their friends, from their routine, the things that might have kept them going or kept them socially and emotionally stable is no longer there as a foundation. So I think those are some things to look for. And, other behavioral factors, you might see a little bit more of whining or crying in some younger children, a little bit more talking back or just inability to stick to a schedule for some of the older students, maybe middle school, high school.
I mean, just listening to you talk about this, it really calls into focus. These last few months have really been different,
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if everyone's ready to deal with what could happen, not just to kids returning to school, but the social emotional factors that may inhibit learning. Just because of where children have been for the last few months and the uncertainty that may come in the future. Dr. Ebanks, you have something to say? Dr. Ebanks, you're on. I can't hear you.
I'll start again. I think certainly thinking about the social emotional well-being of the child is very important because every child could be at a different state because of how what they have been exposed to during this time of the pandemic. There are some children that totally might have been completely isolated from friends or contact with even other family members because of, accessibility, limitation of accessibility, or due to safety reasons for their health. Other families might have allowed for gatherings, so every child is going to be different. And I think that educators are really going to have to be prepared to understand that children are coming back very different. That's the reality. And maybe at a different maturity level, as a result of this. There's a lot of socialization that happens at kindergarten and first grade that is part of, their development, and growth that has been stunted in some sense because of not being in school, not only for the typical 3 months of a summer break, but now it's 6 months. And then if schools do not reopen until January, there's a lot more to be expected as a result of that. So it is something for, administration to consider as they're thinking about a plan, of returning back to school, that it has to involve some social interactive activities and time for emotional development, and not just focus on academics and looking at grades.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for older children, maybe not so much for younger children or children who are entering school for the first time, but you have a group of children, teenagers, adults, adolescents, who are used to navigating and operating in school in a completely different way. And when you open back up, no touching, no talking, we're wearing masks. There's a whole new environment and whole new socialization experience that will have to occur, and that may be stressful. I just can imagine being in the old space, an old familiar space with new rules.
Yeah. Right. And even the fear of coughing, someone coughing that could just been because they're clearing their throat or whatever. Now there's fear really set upon certain things that might have not, caused fear in the past.
Yes. Well, and I think too, the aspect of like both of you said, when you're coming back, it's almost this sense of false hope. We're not coming back to anything. Mm-hmm. We're coming to a new normal. So like you said, there's the new normal when it comes to safety precautions, right? There's a new normal when it comes to health. Because now like you said, we've been out of school for quite some time, or out of that traditional setting for enough time that we're bringing in, in this case, we're talking about children. So pediatricians and consulting with them, nurses, but doubling, tripling that, because the implications health-wise, we don't know, right? We don't know where students have been, what they've been doing, like you said, what they've been exposed to, and if they have been taking the right precautions, and if they're even being able to take care of themselves, right? We have certain communities that, housing and domicile plays a factor into their health and well-being. And especially thinking about how we get educators, how we get mental health clinicians, how we get pediatricians, all on board and one accord, because they're all stakeholders in this re-entry of what will now be the new school norm.
Absolutely. I can think about in New York and all across the country, you have actually educators who won't be returning because either they're scared, they retire, or some of them, unfortunately, have become victims of COVID-19. And so you have that whole, the impact is seen from many levels. And I like how you use the word stakeholders, because everyone is a stakeholder in the reopening of these schools. And looking at that, what questions should be asked? What should all stakeholders expect in the 2020-21 year?
Right. And I want to say questions, because it really is, like I said, it's a conversation. It's a continuous conversation. I might even not say conversation, but strategizing, really, when it comes to something that's a health pandemic, but also social pandemic and economically as well. But you want to know, what are the resources that we're providing to staff? We typically have a professional development. You have your different schools call it different things, but your kickoff times. But that's also the time to rein in on what is the curriculum that we're using for, like you said, to have social and emotional time dedicated during that school day, because that's going to be essential in not re-traumatizing these students coming back into the school. Those mental health professionals and educators collaborating consistently.
You wash your hands?
To create a way to create a safe and socially appropriate social distancing. Because like you said, if we're wearing masks, if we're being separated, how do we still teach some of those foundational skills of turn taking, waiting for attention or waiting your turn, or not being able to get what you want instantaneously? We have to still be able to teach that at school and in these environments. Another question I would ask, like you said, staff that don't feel safe coming back, how are we now going to create some sort of team rotation so that we're still providing this high level, impactful, quality instruction, for our students? Those are some key questions that I would definitely want to know what are the answers to, or at least what are the thought processes to kind of create a solution.
Yeah, I think those are some great questions that you can ask. Especially, when you go back to the whole new socialization, I think the opportunity of this time is that we've been working more on our social skills, working more on our emotional intelligence, working more on those soft skills, because we don't have a physical presence. And so I think we're more in tune, or we are more aware that we should be in tune with those things. But it's definitely going to be important to incorporate some time to relearn not just old social skills, but social skills for the new normal.
Right.
What advice would you give to support parents prior to school opening?
Yeah, I think supporting them in, one, asking them questions. So asking the how and the when the schools will be able to create some sort of either like a morning meeting, social learning, some sort of aspect in the school day that is catered to all students returning, right? Because I think parents are also thinking about, okay, I might have a student that typically didn't have any social or emotional differences or difficulties, but you still want them to be supported in some sort of way, some sort of check-in, check-out, and you want to be able to start that at home so it can be mirrored at school. But we've also touched on another camp, so to speak, of students that were already getting additional support. We're already getting additional maybe mental health support or medical support to regulate themselves and regulate their emotions. So now this is compounded upon. So what are those parents going to be doing? Which I think some of those strategies could be mirroring what you want to see in a school. So like mirroring that routine, right? Having a routine that that student can kind of internalize. I think something age appropriate for a younger student might be like singing the same song every day, or having a game that you play. Someone older, maybe reading the same book or reading the same magazine. This day and age, being on social media, if that's, you have a teenager, talking about that, but having a dedicated time every day, and verbalizing that certain emotional shifts are okay. And talking about, let's say something didn't work out during their day. I think for parents to verbalize, oh, I love how you're being so flexible about this. Like, this was bothersome to me too. Giving them some of those buzzwords of flexibility, resiliency, strength, and kind of creating that positive dialogue so that when they go to school and have those similar uncomfortable feelings, they can tap back into, oh, this is uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable before. Now I need to be resilient with it. How do I adapt? And socially, we're in this day and age right now of virtual. So for parents to call up a friend virtually, have some of those play dates for little kids, or have those group dates for older folks. I think now with like the movies, being able to do some of that streaming online, especially for those teenagers, creates that sense of social camaraderie. So to,
Yeah. And I would certainly, add to all that Kim shared, to also state that preparing them, beforehand, because again, their sleep might be off, just the responsibility and the routine of, the academic rigor that they may have to experience in the classroom, to have those conversations about what the child may have fears of returning, or regarding the academic performance, or as well as the socialization. Start having those conversations. Also, for the parents to be patient, because this is very, as parents, I'm a parent myself, have never been in this experience before, as a child or as an adult. So it is going to need to be patience with yourself as a parent, as well as with the child, especially regarding those transitional years, going to middle school or going to high school or going to elementary school. Those are all those vital transitional years, or having a senior and wondering how this is going to prepare them and impact them for their future. So I think that it is important for parents to just practice, patience, and continue to help the child work on themselves, as well as work with others, socially.
I agree.
I like how you talk about practicing patience, Dr. Ebanks, because I think not only are the parents are in uncharted territory, maybe the experts are in uncharted territory, and so they may not even know how to help you because they don't know. They've never been here before. I mean, you have theories and you have all that other stuff, but this is new for everyone. So patience at every level is definitely something that we all have to embrace, because this is a long journey ahead, and take your time. How do educators prevent secondary trauma? First, Kim, would you explain secondary trauma, and then talk about how we can prevent it for our children?
Right. So secondary trauma is somewhat of that compounded trauma or compounded negative experience that is either exacerbated by a current situation, or that is creating an ongoing sense of trauma or feeling. So in this case that we're speaking to, this COVID pandemic, re-entering an environment that students have not been in, may look different, or an environment that now seems less comfortable and less safe, may be re-traumatizing to students, even visually. You're coming into a place that used to be open and friendly and people are giving hugs and high fives, to now perhaps being screened from the forehead before you come in, being greeted with, a certain level of distance of 6 feet, and having a barrier of some sort, may create or may unfortunately elicit some of those triggers that either were addressed before or unfortunately may not have been addressed before.
Again, listening to you, I think parents, everyone, really need to pay attention to that. This is a new normal that we are creating.
Yeah.
And to really be patient, like Dr. Ebanks says, but really be aware that this is new, and this is not the world that they're used to, that anyone is used to.
Yeah.
And it is likely that lots of things may be triggering, as you just said. Opening up the door, that could trigger fear, anxiety, it's small things that could really set off, a chain of events for your child. And I don't think we talk about those things. We just really kind of everything's going back to normal. It's safer now, but there are lots of things that you really have to think about. And professionals like you are going to be there to kind of make sure that everyone is aware of that. But I just think that's something that we really have to talk about more. It's not the same.
It's not
putting your kid off.
Yeah,
ongoing. At 3, it's a lot that's going to be happening at school.
Right. And I think, like what you said, as far as educators are still educating themselves on how to support others. You know, we have bits and pieces from other professionals, which we're blessed to have that, right? Blessed to be able to be in an environment where everyone is online for the most part. So you can navigate the internet and navigate conversations with professionals, like we said, from the health community, from mental health and counseling, psychologists, psychiatrists. But I think something you said really sparked the thought that the re-traumatizing and the community, I think this is also the time to think about our political climate of addressing what community are you serving, and are you really tapping into what that specific community needs, right? So even with that social emotional support, making sure that we're supporting the needs of the students that we serve, and not having just like a blanket curriculum or a blanket statement that, you know, we're teaching social emotional skills. Like, we want them to still be authentic, right? We want our kids to still be able to express themselves in a culturally appropriate way, and not necessarily just conform to what was the norm of what we expect, right? So I think making sure we're providing support based on, you know, socioeconomic status, based on gender identity, based on the primary language of some of our students, if that is an integral piece in the community that you're serving. You know, we don't want to, I guess, like put our own biases on what is appropriate social and emotional skills. We want to keep, you know, the idea of what's the cultural practice, also what's realistic.
Ms. Edwards, I have a question also regarding especially serving the children with special needs.
Sure.
You know, as a speech and language pathologist, you know, some of this information, you know, certainly relates to all parents and, you know, or all educators and as well to help children. But we also have to think about those children with special needs that need additional services, additional assistance. And as a speech pathologist, you know, what information can you give to other speech pathologists or other educators in terms of serving students during this time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a population that I almost want to say needs the most support, because like you said earlier, there's so many tiers and layers of the needs that students have. And to add a difference or a disability to that level of need requires an additional level of quality instruction and therapy and support that is really focused on that student and that family, really, because family needs and means factors into how much they can give their student. I think modeling what is necessary, so prioritizing the skills as best as possible, and for clinicians really adapting to what is tangible and what is functional in the home. Because unfortunately, you know, we have to factor in what is currently available to those parents that need to continue the education, continue the life skills, to better their children, you know, to really get them ready for living in our community as best and as independently as possible. So I think factoring in what can be done and what can be transferable, you know, I know a lot of schools are doing the virtual teletherapy. I know some therapists, occupational therapists, are sending home items, but it really takes a certain skill set, and going back to that word patience, to be able to walk someone through what they can do without you being physically there as that professional.
And I think empowering the parents to continue having that voice for the child and asking, you know, administration and educators in terms of how do these services will continue if we continue with, you know, distance learning. You know, what are my expectations for what are the expectations for the children to continue to receive the speech and language services, online, or how often, as well as, what are the plans to perhaps do in service, or as you said, the kits, what kind of additional resources can be provided, to families. Because I think that the first time, because of how quickly there was a need to transition, there wasn't a lot of time to prepare. So hopefully school systems are working and thinking about all of those as they continue to negotiate and consider whether or not their students are returning to school, and these plans to do some services that, in school part of the week, or, at home and distance learning the other part of the week. How is that going to look for a child with special needs? So
Right.
only empowering parents to advocate for their children is going to be very, very important.
Yes, I agree. And advocating for that service, in particular, I think just building on what you said, if a student or a county, so to speak, is only having students coming into the building 2 days a week, then as a parent, ensure that those 2 days, those, related service providers, the mental health professionals, people are present. So you're not missing any services or missing that opportunity, really. And like you said, school leaders, administrators, really thinking outside the box at this point, because we have to be creative about this service delivery. I know that I consulted with one individual about using the VR systems as a way to help support some of those circumstances that you can't go out into the community in the same way. But that's something that a school system could purchase that would be monumental to help, especially students with special needs, in order to be able to continue some of that growth and some of those IEP goals, targeting them as best as possible.
Yeah, and I know with the MECCA Group, with the schools that we provide services for and have partnered to continue to provide services over the summer, as well as looking into the new school year, that we have thought about innovative ways to provide services and ongoing, services to children with special needs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, ladies, you mentioned so many moving parts in terms of returning back to school. How can we measure, assess, or evaluate the readiness for practitioners, educators, even parents? How can we evaluate the readiness for these ideas, these things that need to happen? How can we evaluate the readiness for them to be implemented?
That's a good question.
That's a good one. I think that consistent communication is important between the administrators, the educators, as well as the parents. The monitoring of the progression of children and the impact that it is having on the children and families. I think that is how you determine like as you said, the readiness, as well as, the effect of it all. So I think it's very important to do the surveys, to encourage parents, like making sure that the feedback that they're getting is being utilized, first of all. People don't want to feel as if I'm filling out this survey and it doesn't even matter. They need to know that it is going to matter, and how it's going to matter. So I think that is very important. That constant, persistent communication is key, and showing this is the statistics behind it. People are driven by statistics. We, do rely on that, because we don't want to think that the numbers are lying. We unfortunately, during this, pandemic, we have been driven by the numbers. As soon as the numbers go down, that's when they open up. As soon as things open up, numbers go back up, things are closing down again. So people are driven by the numbers. Like they're comfortable, their sense of comfort is going to rely on the numbers. How many cases are at the school? You certainly don't want to expose any names of any children, but parents do want to know, well, how many cases teachers or children have had it or are contracting it. That is going to be important.
Right. I agree with all that. I think factoring in all the necessary parties in this, like I said, multi-tiered system, because in order to say someone is ready, we have to have some level of fidelity, right? Some measurement to say socially, we have these things in place and we can maintain them throughout the time students are in the building. We have the CDC guidelines and regulations, like you said, where is that number that we're going to say if this, pandemic, or if there is an increase in students that are contracting this virus, then we will not move forward. So having that hard line of what is and what isn't safe, but for multiple components of that whole child, right? And then making sure that we have the appropriate professionals at the table, and not forgetting about, those stakeholders, those families, the community members that are serving on the front lines, making sure they have a valuable and valued say in the conversation. And I think the surveys are a great idea. I'm a huge fan of the virtual town halls, just so you can kind of tap into some people that may not be able to have the means to physically take something somewhere, or based on like reading level, you're wanting to capture as many people in a community as possible.
There are so many moving parts that I can't imagine being an administrator who has to put together a plan for reopening a school, because all these moving parts are so important and can impact on whether or not a child is doing exactly what you want them to do. And earlier you talked about cultural competency. I think that is so important. We often leave that out. Especially in these times, you have to be culturally competent and culturally responsive, even more so than ever before. Lots of things are happening. Are you? How confident, are you that school districts are ready for children to come back? If you don't want to answer, that's fine. But how confident are you, based on what you're seeing?
Yeah. What I will say is there is a need for continued discussion. And like I said, when I say discussion, I really mean strategizing on the how and the who will be executing some of these reentry policies prior to kind of cutting that, that red tape and saying, okay, welcome back. I think that those need to be documented action steps, but really going back to the how and the who. If those questions can't be answered, then we're not ready.
And I agree. I think that the administration has to take into consideration, as one of our viewers had stated, the medical experts. And also when it comes to the medical experts is also the psychologists on the team to help discuss the emotional and social impact of children, but also the educators. Also there should be parents as part of that, at every grade level. Be representative of the team to make the decisions, because sometimes the board may be only community members, but not necessarily be investors in the sense that they're parents. Maybe their children are in college, so they can't necessarily relate to the same concerns that a third grade parent may have, or a parent of a 11th grader. So I think it has to be an effort and decision made by all stakeholders, as we stated before, and with the statistics, as a foundation and an important part of making that decision. And to also going back to the flexibility. How are parents who decide that they're not ready and their children are not ready to go back to school, are they going to get the same level of education as a parent, as a child who is going back into the building? To encourage and not just say, well, if you don't go back to school, then you're getting home packets only. But if you come into the building, you're getting the expert, teachings. That then forces a parent to make a decision,
Right.
Rather than it being a comfortable, decision for the family. And I think it's not a blanket decision sometimes, because the administration also has to consider who are the families in their community. We may have a school that a majority of the children live perhaps with their grandparents, so then they have to consider, if their children are living with their grandparents that may have, health ailments, then that is putting them more at risk, of losing one of their guardians. Then what's going to happen to the child? Then you have an increase in foster care. So it's a lot of factors to consider, a lot.
I think that's going to be made clear in this webcast, is that there are multiple stakeholders at risk for the reopening of the schools, not just the children, but the teachers, the parents of the extended family, who, like you mentioned, grandmothers, multi-generational families. And so that all must be taken into consideration when opening schools. And that's something that I think people need to talk about a little bit more. It's not just the school, it's not just the children, but it's really, there are multiple stakeholders. Because if your teachers aren't mentally prepared to operate at full capacity, then what is really happening at the school? If children aren't ready to show up healthy and mentally prepared, then what is really happening at the school? So yes, I think that it's all great. I feel great right now because I'm working on my doctorate, and implementation theory is what we've been working on for the last few weeks. And so I'm like, great, this is my class. Now I feel like I'm not wasting money. So yes, all this stuff is so important. Last thoughts before we go: what should we be prepared for?
The not knowing. We really don't have, I think you made a comment earlier that this is new territory for all, and again, kind of going back to the patients of, there's not all the questions are going to be answered now because there's still more information to be gathered, but also because there are so many unanswered questions that you have to consider, is it the appropriate time to return to school? And if they're not to return to school, the impact that may have on families financially if a parent can't go back to work. So this is where we do need our government support. Our government, instead of not providing financial assistance to schools, provide additional support systems to school to hire more teachers, to do online teaching if necessary, to provide more support service providers such as speech language pathologists to work with children, and school counselors, to provide more small groups on social emotional, support services for children. So this is a time that we, as parents, as educators, as professionals, need to reach out to the government officials to say, we need more money, we need more funding, rather than the threat to take away funding if schools don't open. We want them to open up safely because there's so many, there's lives at stake. At the end of the day, there are lives at stake, and which are impacted in so many different ways. So that's my last.
I agree wholeheartedly. This is an entire generation, and so when you say lives, it's ours too. This is the next generation, and their education, their health. We say we want to build resiliency in our students. We need to build resiliency in us as adults. So like you said, to be vocal, be present, and not to let up. This is important for everyone in every community.
Dr. Ebanks, I like how you mentioned, the government, because I think we think about kids returning to school and that's it. Everyone goes back to living their lives as normal. But if they don't return back to school, the government has to step up in some other way because people can't work for kids being at home.
Right.
And so there's multiple angles that this problem has to be attacked. There has to be multiple, there are multiple stakeholders. The government is part of the solution. And so if they don't provide the resources for the alternative or to support the return, this will all collapse. And so I think it's important that everyone take note that everyone is responsible for pushing us towards the new normal. And if one person, one piece of the puzzle is left out, it will collapse. Kim, we're about to say something.
And I would co-sign. I said, say it for those in the back. Everyone is a stakeholder in this. Everyone.
And I have a teacher who is also viewing, and she says they're talking within the group of, as educators, they're talking and speaking to administration and speaking, to parents about, their stance. Because again, educators are in it because they, love children. They want children to thrive. And we need, whether it's in the physical building or in the homes, education has to continue. That I don't think that anyone is in disagreement because, because as you said, this is our next generation. So we need, the children to continue to, and not, to be educated. So that, and not to come from penalizing, like there shouldn't be the thought of penalties for not going to school, not doing your homework, not, being present in school or not opening up the schools, but more a time of, and I see behind you, Miss Edwards, that the word perseverance, and that we will be okay if we all work together, for the common good, of children and families and, in individuals. So I think that it will happen in time. To be patient again. I think that is just like, a key word, and to remain vocal, and to communicate what are your needs, and not to come from a selfish, standpoint, but, from a safety standpoint, because you're trying to protect others, as well.
I think that's, I like that. And thanks, to that, your teacher for pointing that out, but it's very important that all stakeholders, again, be included, not just in the conversation, but in terms of the solution, because what you're hoping to fix may not be a need for the stakeholder. And so everyone is important in coming up with a solution for moving forward. And so if you're out there, if you're in the capacity of leadership, if you're in the capacity of teaching, wherever you are, parent, student, child, your voice is important in terms of coming up with a solution for moving forward in the fall. Thank you, ladies, so much for talking with us on MECCA Moments. If you have any questions, where should they direct the questions to, Dr. Ebanks?
Oh, they certainly can go to our page, the Facebook page at the MECCA Group. Also, they're welcome to visit our website, the MECCA Group LLC.com. They can there find information to how to contact me individually or Miss Edwards with any information, questions or need for information. Like to make an announcement that we haven't been on for the last 2 weeks. And part of it is because we needed a break. This is important to know with this is that we are working so much harder at home, and that is important to take time to yourself and take a break. And also with that, MECCA Moments is moving forward. We're going to be on every second and fourth Friday. Rather than every week, but every second and fourth Friday. And on the 24th of this month, we're also going to be talking about suicide. Dr. Mack will be on with a guest, and Brandon Gillespie, to speak about the impact of suicide, or the impact of social emotional stress-related concerns, and how that has impacted and increased suicide within the Black community. So it's a very important, much needed conversation to be had.
All right.
Thank you all for having me again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We always enjoy you being here and sharing your knowledge and information with everyone. Dr. Ebanks, also, I want to ask you if schools, if administrators watching, are there services for them to help them implement, some of these things we talked about?
Certainly, yes, yes. Administrators, educators, you can share this information with your administration. I have a lot of friends who are following on Facebook that are educators, and you could certainly share our website information with your administration team. We provide professional development, as well as social emotional services for staff, as well as for children and families. So we could, certainly implement speech and language services, occupational services to children. So we are here to help all.
Everybody gets help. Everybody gets help. You get help. You get help. All right. Thank you, ladies. We'll see you back on the 24th, I guess, on the MECCA Moment. I hope you have a great weekend, everyone. Until next time. Bye.
Thank you.